Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I wanted to talk about some of the trade rumors we've been seeing leading up to the NBA draft, and most in particular, go over what's going on right now with the Pelicans and Zion Williamson. He's been in the news for a couple of reasons as of late. I'm not going to get into the first one. If you know, you know, and if you don't, good, I wish I didn't. But the reason I want to talk about in this video is what's going on with him and the Pelicans in terms of potentially a trade involving the NBA draft. A rumor came out a couple of days ago from Shams where he said that apparently the Pelicans are really interested in trying to add Scoot Henderson to this team and trading up for a pick to select him. That's really interesting because we've seen a number of teams be in these rumors, but the Pelicans are definitely a new one. And it makes a lot of sense as to why they try and pursue him. If you've watched this channel over the past few weeks, you'll know I'm a big Scoot Henderson fan. I think he has the potential to be a generational guard prospect. He could be a top 10 player, multiple All-NBA selections, perennial All-Star. I'm that high on Scoot. So it makes sense that a team like the Pelicans that is still relatively young, but also wants to compete now, would be trying to add a talent like him because I think he's going to make an impact from day one. He is one of those types of players. And if they could somehow build a big three of him, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson, that would be terrifying. As a basketball fan, it would be one of the most fun teams in the entire league. And as a fan of a team in the Western Conference, the Thunder, it's one of the scariest propositions I've ever seen. The idea of us having to go through a team with that type of talent, with potentially a great supporting cast as well, is terrifying. So that's been on my mind a lot over the past few days, ever since that Shams report came out. And if they want to bring in Scoot, there are two teams they're going to have to try and trade with because he's not going to go any later than the third overall pick, and that's the Hornets and the Blazers. Charlotte is going to be a lot more difficult to trade with because I think they're probably pretty set there at number 2. There are some rumors that they'd be willing to move the pick for a massive haul, but I think it's most likely they just make their selection at the second spot, whether that is Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson. The rumor has been for a while that they like Brandon Miller a bit better. Maybe that's a smokescreen. Apparently they had a workout recently with Scoot that did go really well, so maybe he does end up going second like I think he should, but for right now we really don't know what's going on with the Hornets, except for the fact that I'm pretty sure they will make that selection, even though we're not really sure who does end up going there at 2. So if the Pelicans or any other team wants to get a deal done to get into that top 3, it's probably going to have to go through the Portland Trail Blazers, which is probably perfectly fine with Portland because they've made it no secret that they want to trade that pick. They want to bring in a star caliber player to build next to Damian Lillard. I've said a million times that I don't think that's the right way to go. They should rebuild and just take someone at number 3, but it does seem like that's the route they're pretty set on. And so I would imagine that pick does get moved by draft night, most likely probably on draft night. I think most teams will probably try and evaluate who is available at 3, whether it is Scoot or Brandon Miller, before officially making the deal. But I do think that selection will be traded. It's just a matter of who it ends up going for. Maybe it's the Raptors trading Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby in exchange for that pick as they try and pursue a rebuild, which is seemingly more and more likely. Maybe it's the Wizards who, according to Woj today, have opened up a dialogue with Bradley Beal about his future, and there's a real shot that he might be traded by the draft, potentially to Portland for that 3rd overall pick or some package involving those two assets. I don't know what either side would ask for, but I would imagine that is a possibility, especially when there's another report that the Wizards really want to get into the top 3 like most teams in this draft. I think there's like 20 other teams that are probably also going to be in those conversations. Like I could see Chicago trying to see if the Blazers want Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan in exchange for that selection. But I think still the most interesting option is the Pelicans. Now they've got a million assets that would interest almost every single team. They've got Trey Murphy III, who I think has a ton of potential, like potentially all-star upside, and at the very worst, he's going to be one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league. You've got Dyson Daniels, a really interesting guard who had a solid rookie campaign and was just taken with a top 10 pick. They've also got a million draft selections still left over from the Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis deals. Like the Pelicans have a war chest of assets that, again, most teams would be incredibly interested in, except for the fact that you're talking about the Blazers, who, again, are going to want a star or all-star caliber talent to put next to Dame in exchange for the pick. So, of course, this means while Scoot, B.I., and Zion would be really fun and interesting, I don't think it's possible. If the Pelicans want to get up in the draft, they're going to have to deal either Zion or Brandon Ingram. Now, maybe there's a scenario where there's a 3-team deal where the Pelicans give up a bunch of those assets to another squad. That squad gives a star player to the Blazers. The Pelicans get the 3rd overall pick. Maybe something like that happens, although I think the team that would be giving up the star would just want the 3rd overall pick unless they're not really high on this draft. It's a weird mess of a scenario. It is technically possible, but I think it's pretty unlikely. So I do think in any scenario where this deal gets done, the Pelicans have to give up one of their 2 stars. And this, of course, has sparked a debate across NBA Twitter about whether you'd rather deal Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson in exchange for Scoot Henderson if he's there at that 3rd overall pick. Or I guess the 2nd overall pick if the Hornets are willing to move it. But regardless, it's become a really heated topic. And so I decided to go ahead and drop a Twitter poll asking people, hey, which would you rather trade? Would you rather trade BI or trade Zion if you had to deal one in exchange for Scoot? A lot of people said they wouldn't trade either. They just keep running this thing forward, which I think does make a lot of sense because when they've been healthy, they've been dominant. They were the 1 seed for a majority of the beginning of this season when Zion was playing, even with Ingram being injured at the start. Then Zion got hurt. Brandon Ingram was also out for a bit more time. Brandon Ingram came back and they kind of turned things around before losing the play into OKC. But overall, they were good when they were healthy, and they have been over the past few years. So it makes sense that a lot of people think they should just keep running this thing back. And if you ask me, that's probably the route I would go. But back to the poll, it got a lot of responses. It got 6,022 votes. And the results were kind of surprising because it finished with 58.7% of people voting to trade Zion and 41.3% voting to trade Brandon Ingram. I honestly expected it the other way around, more in favor of Brandon Ingram even. I expected like a 65-35% split in Ingram's favor to be traded. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Brandon Ingram's game. I have seen him firsthand destroy teams. He gave me heart attacks in the playing game against OKC. He hit a game winner over Lou Dort also against us this season. Like, he terrorized us as he's terrorized the rest of the league a number of times. Last year in the playoffs against the Suns, he was a monster. He nearly led that team to an upset of the #1 overall seed that just set a franchise record in wins. He is an incredible player that has all-star potential every year and could maybe even have all NBA upside in a few seasons. But on the other side of the equation, we have Zion Williamson, who is a generational talent and in my opinion, a borderline top 10 player when healthy, with real upside to being the best player in the world conversations when he gets further on in his career. He's still really young. He's in his early 20s. He's only played a few seasons in the league and he's dominated whenever he's been on the court. In his sophomore year, he averaged 27.7 rebounds and 4 assists. This past season, he was an all-star starter and averaged 26 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists on 65.2 true shooting percentage. And again, when Brandon Ingram was hurt at the beginning of the season, Zion was carrying this team to a 1 seed. They were the 1 seed even though BI was injured, with Zion leading the charge. He is, again, a generational player. He is a superstar caliber guy. I know the injuries are a big concern, but giving up on him at this point in his career feels really silly. I've seen a lot of people try and liken what's happening with Zion to Greg Oden, and I think that's pretty disingenuous to the situation. Oden was an extreme case. He was never really that effective in the NBA because of those injuries. I'm one of the many people that thinks if he was healthy, he would have been a monster in the league, but injuries just really derailed him, and over the course of his entire career, which was 7 seasons, he missed 4 full years, and when he did play, he played just 105 games. That's how many Zion has played so far in the first 4 years of his career. So yeah, while Zion has missed some time, to say that he's like Greg Oden, who played the same number of games in 7 seasons as opposed to Zion's 4, while Zion has been an all-NBA caliber player when he's played, it feels a bit extreme. Instead, I think I'd liken the start of Zion's career a lot more to that of Joel Embiid, who missed the first couple seasons of his career with a foot injury and played just 31 games in his rookie season, but from the beginning was dominant. He showed that if he could stay on the court, he was going to be a force in the league for years to come, and eventually he was able to stay on it decently consistently. Now, he still has never played over 70 games in a season, but he's reached the point where last year he played 68 games, this year he played 66. He's eclipsed the 60 mark 4 times in the 7 years that he's played. Joel Embiid has shown an ability to stay on the court for a majority of the time, and yeah, there still are some concerns, especially when he gets to the playoffs with his durability, but he's become an MVP caliber player. I'm hoping that this is the trajectory that Zion's career can go on, going from really injury prone at the beginning of his career and many people questioning him, but showcasing dominance along the way, to eventually being able to stay on the court as much as he can and being a force while maybe rising up into an MVP type player like Joel Embiid is now. I think there's a real chance that that's his trajectory. And if you're the Pelicans, you can't give up on that this soon. I know the front office is probably frustrated with the fact that he hasn't been able to be out there, but I really just feel like giving up on someone with this much potential is a massive mistake, and it's something that they would come to regret if they dealt him at this point in his career. I know his teammates are also probably frustrated. We've seen some comments from CJ McCollum that definitely hint at that. But again, you just can't give up this type of player with this type of potential right now. At least I don't think you should. I think if you've got to choose between two of them, you should trade Brandon Ingram, who himself has kind of been injury prone over the course of his career. If you take a look at his games played per season, he also has not really managed to stay on the court that often, and I like the upside of Zion a lot more than I like Ingram's. I don't think Ingram is ever going to become in the conversation for the best player in the world, while I think Zion has a legit chance to do so in a few seasons when he enters his prime, because again, he's still in his early 20s. I think he's 22, maybe 23 years old, and he's already accomplished so much despite playing not that many games. And this whole saga also brings up another question of, if the Pelicans are willing to move Zion for that third overall pick or whatever they have to move him for Scoot, would they be willing to trade him somewhere else? Maybe there's another team out there with some really interesting assets, and the Pelicans say, okay, we're done with Zion, we're frustrated, we're willing to move off of his big contract that he has right now because we're not sure if he's ever going to get healthy, and try and bring in some other players to put next to Brandon Ingram. Is there another team out there that could potentially throw them a Godfather offer that they end up accepting? That's something else that I've been thinking about with this situation, is not just, do they trade him for Scoot, but maybe they're looking to trade him in general. If he is truly available, I expect so many teams to start to build together packages. I saw a report today that apparently the Knicks are interested, the Rockets are also interested, which is no surprise from either of those teams, and I think a million other squads would be willing to take the chance on Zion just to see if his potential ends up rounding out, especially if you're a team with a lot of assets like maybe OKC or the Jazz, where you've got a billion draft picks, and hey, maybe you're just willing to bring in a guy like Zion. Sure, maybe you have to give up 4 or 5 first-round picks and some young players, but if you think that Zion could be this generational type player for your franchise, maybe you take that risk. As an OKC fan, I'm not sure if the Thunder would go ahead and do that trade, just because I don't know how he and Shea really fit together, and I know a lot of Thunder fans aren't in on that idea. I'm just saying that any team with a bunch of capital should at least consider the possibility. In general, over the past week or so, I've seen a lot of crazy takes about Zion on the timeline, and I think people are getting a little too blinded by the injury stuff and forgetting how good he can be when he's healthy. Again, I know availability is the best ability, or whatever that saying is, but when you take a look at what Zion has done and can do, you have to take the risk on this guy. I think the Pelicans should just stick this thing out, stay with Brandon Ingram and him as your duo going forward. If Trey Murphy keeps developing the way that he can, if Dyson Daniels becomes something, if you're able to bring in some other pieces, and Zion just stays healthy, as well as Brandon Ingram, who again has dealt with some injury issues of his own, I think you have a perennial contender there in New Orleans. And I think giving up that long-term potential is just overly short-sighted. As much as I love Scoot, if I'm the Pelicans, I don't make this deal, and if they do, it could be one of the biggest mistakes that we've seen in quite some time. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. As always, if a Zion trade happens, or any number of trades involving the third overall pick or anything that's big, of course, you will see an initial trade reaction video on this channel the second I can get to record following the deal. I'm going to go ahead and get those videos up, so make sure you turn on the notification bell as well to be updated on all big moves during this really fun offseason. I think we're going to get one of the busiest off seasons that we've seen in quite some time, between trades, free agency, this draft. It's still a really fun time to go ahead and make content. There's gonna be a lot of fun stuff coming on the channel, so again, make sure to stay tuned for those. But yeah, I appreciate y'all watching. Let me know in the comment section below, would you trade Zion or Ingram if you had to deal one of them for Scoot? Would you keep this team together, and what do you think is going to happen with Zion? Do you think he can have a Joel Embiid type arc where he goes from injury prone to eventual MVP type player, or do you really think that his career is going to be super short because of these injuries? I'll see y'all later. Real One Say Back.